What's going on, guys? Welcome to a new part of the series for Python beginners. In the last tutorial, we talked about how to install and set up the Python environment so that we can run Python properly. And in this series, in this part of the series, we're going to be talking about data types and variables. Before I continue, in the last tutorial, I forgot to mention something. So, in the part where I showed you guys how to run Python on Sublime, I told you guys that we would go to Tools, Build System, and we press New Build System, and a file like this comes up. And I told you guys to paste a certain lines of code. And then I said after you paste that code in, you save it as something like Python 3 or Python 3.9 and whatnot. After you do that, I told you to press Command and B on a program such as this one, then it would just work. Well, that's not entirely true. After you save the file, let's just say I called it Python underscore 3.8, you have to go to Tools and you have to pick the system that you built. So in this case, it would be this one. This will show as the file name that I saved as the system that I built. So that's that. Just remove this. Okay. So to explain data types and variables, I want to talk about, just to understand it better, I want to just briefly talk about the idea of English. Just with English, just like with any language, has a set of rules attached to them so that it makes sense. And these rules include, spelling, grammar, syntax. And Python is no different. It is a language, and there are rules that you have to follow so that it makes sense. And two of these rules are called variables and data types. To explain this better, let's start with an example. Say you had a neighbor called John, and they're 30 years old. Now, what I like to call these things are called entities, right? Name is an entity, age is an entity, and every entity has a word, some information attached to it, so that it makes life easier. And what does that mean? So, everybody has a name, and we distinguish each other by different names. So, for example, your neighbor's called John, and when you say the name John, there's a set of information attached to it. When you say the word age, there's a set of information attached. In this case, is 30. And really, this is just information, And in Python, we could also do the same. Instead of calling these things entities and information, we call them variables and data. So how we assign information to a variable is we start off with the variable name. So in this case, the variable name is name, and we put an equal sign between it. This is me telling Python that I want a variable called name being assigned to the value John. Now I'll explain the double quotes in a bit. Next, we want the age, a variable called age, have the value 30. Now I'm just going to delete these things here. So note that we told Python that we want two variables called name and age, and each of them are called John and 30 respectively. Now, a way to check what Python knows after we gave them some information is to use print. So I want to know what Python. I want Python to recall what name is, and I also want Python to recall what age is. So I'm gonna press Command B here, and we see that Python recognizes name as John and it as 30. So this is one way for just a way for Python to place values, information, just data onto entities, and in their case, it's called variables. Now, in this case, it looks like it makes sense because somebody's name could be named John and somebody's age could be 30. However, one thing to note is that Python is indifferent to these names. So what does that mean? I can change this to age and name, and you can see these two switch, and name becomes 30, age becomes John, and that's pretty confusing. But the point to show here is that Python does not care what variable names you set them out to be. It only cares when you ask Python what they were when you assigned them to it. So that's with variables. The next thing we want to talk about is data types. Now, the information, the data that we assign these variable names to also follow a set of rules. And what are they? I'm only gonna show the most commonly used ones for data types. There are a lot more that exist, but I'm just going to show the ones that are easy to understand now so it doesn't get confusing. So like I said, these also follow a certain rules, and we separate them into types. So we have strings. We have strings. So for example, a string like John is always going to be encased in double quotes. We have integers, which are numbers without decimals. So for example, 3, 2, 4. And then we have also in the category, so let me just add it here, numbers. So although in the category of numbers, numeric data is floats, which have some set of decimals. So for example, this is a float, this is a float. And finally we have booleans, which could either be true or false. Now, remember I said, so first of all, these are the most commonly used data types in Python, and these are the rules that the information have to follow. So for strings, strings must be encased in double quotes. Integers can just be the name, and the floats, so I could also do just decimals here. So this is a float, and interestingly enough, this could also be true or false. So what does that mean? Well, we'll get to that later on, but all that means is it could actually hold these values when I try to print them out. So for example, I assign the name to the value true, and you can see that it prints out the name with the value true. So just a couple. So these are called data types. So data types are a set of rules that the data must follow, right? It can only be these things, so I can't just make my own rules and say, hey, I'm gonna set the information to be like something like this, some gibberish. This is not gonna run. Or you can see that if I suddenly, so this is a string, this is fine, this is something encased in quotes, but if I added like some integer there, that doesn't work because doesn't follow the rules. And one more thing I forgot to mention is that, let's just change these back. One more thing I forgot to mention is that for variables, they also follow some rules. And these rules include, for example, if I wanted this to be called first name, variable name cannot have space in between them. You can have a space some amount of space in between the equals equal, but you cannot have space in between the variable names. And what this means is usually what people do to solve this issue. Say if I wanted this to be called first name, is you add an underscore in between it. Oh, right. So just as a side note, why doesn't this work? Because there's no name anymore. This is called first name now. So let's call it first name. So first of all, no spaces, no hyphens. This is not going to run. And finally, you cannot add a number, any number, into a variable name. Okay, so those are the rules for variables, and these are some examples of data types that are most commonly used. I will introduce a lot more as the series go on. Thank you for watching, and hope to see you soon in the next tutorial.